Welcome to our new video series, The Weekly 5, a top 5 list covering a wide range of Sega topics. We are celebrating the year developers over at SegaBits.com. That means that each month we will cover notable Sega developers. This month it's all about a developer that is close to my heart, SEGA-AM2. What better way to kick off a new series and discuss 5 ways that SEGA-AM2 changed video gaming? Let's get started. When we think of full-body motion control, we usually picture a camera-like Kinect that allows you to interact with your games. That isn't necessarily true. Full-body motion controls can be much simpler than that. Take AM2's Hang On, a game released in 1985 that had an arcade cabinet with full-body motion controls. The deluxe cabinet of Hang On came equipped with a bike that players would be able to sit on. To move the character on screen, the user would have to tilt side to side, simulating the idea of riding a bike. The popularity of the arcade cabinet led AM2 to release other motion-controlled hydraulic arcade cabinets such as Outrun, Afterburner, Space Harrier. Not only that, this is actually the first game created by Yu Suzuki and went on to be a smash success. It took 20 years after the release of Hang On for motion controls to hit the mainstream in console gaming. This happened thanks to the release of the Wii. Its main selling point was its motion controller, helping it move over 100 million units. Microsoft would later release Kinect, an add-on for its Xbox 360 console that would use a camera and allow users to interact with games using their full body. It was a mainstream success, selling over 24 million units. Before AM2 introduced the first true analog joystick, most video game arcades used mostly 8-way digital controls, which seemed fine for more simple games, but AM2 had a more ambitious vision for the first on-rail shooter. They wanted more precise controls, so they shipped analog joysticks with each cabinet. That wasn't the only thing the joysticks could do. It also offered different speeds depending on how far the user pushed a certain direction. It was also sensitive, so if you barely moved the stick, the character on screen would barely nudge. But if you held it all the way, he would move across the screen faster. This gave arcade goers greater control over the games and a better user experience. Sadly for us console gamers, analog joysticks didn't come home until as early as 1996 when Sega and Sony released their 32-bit systems, over a decade after AM2 released Space Harrier. Even today's next-generation consoles like the PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and Wii U still use analog joysticks. Power Drift wasn't a big game here in the United States, but that doesn't mean it wasn't important for the future of video games. You see, Power Drift was the first kart racing game, released in 1988 in the arcades and designed by Yu Suzuki. The game laid the groundwork for kart racing genre, featuring roller coaster-like tracks that were possible due to the flat bitmap it used for its track layouts. A wide selection of racers, and you get to drive a go-kart. I mean, isn't that why it's on the list? While the game enjoyed ports on other personal computers during the time it was released in the arcades, the game wouldn't grace a Sega console until it was released in 1998 on the Sega Saturn, a decade after the game came out. Nintendo would later popularize the kart racing genre with Mario Kart, which added a brand new features to the genre like power-ups, and was the big reason for the rise in mascot kart racers during the 90s. Sega would also make a couple of mascot kart racers influenced by Mario Kart, including Sonic Drift and Sega and Sonic All-Stars Racing. Once the 90s came around, AM2 hit full force, developing their Model 1 arcade board in 1992. It was the first arcade board that could run 3D games at 60 frames per second with multiple players on screen. The first game that AM2 created with the new board was Virtual Racing. Even though the game broke new grounds at the time, it wasn't the first 3D racing game released. That would go to Namco's Winning Race in 1988. Next, AM2 would take on the fighting genre with Virtual Fighter, showing the power of their Model 1 arcade board by rendering human characters with full facial animation. The game laid the groundwork for later 3D fighters including Tekken and Dead or Alive. Sega would improve their 3D games by releasing the Model 2 arcade board in 1993. The board would allow textured map polygons, which created more detailed 3D games. Some of the first games to use the board included Virtual Fighter 2 and the immensely popular Daytona USA. AM2 launched Virtual Cop, which is the first 3D light gun shooter, and Virtual Striker, the first 3D soccer game. The PlayStation and the Nintendo 64 were still years away after Sega's Model 2 arcade board revolutionized arcade gaming. Shimyu may not have invented QuickTime Events. That should be credited to games like Dragon's Lair and Cliffhanger that both came out in 1983, before SEGA-AM2 was even a team. Outside of a handful of games, this type of interactive cutscenes with timed button presses wasn't really popular until the creation of Shimyu. Yu Suzuki came up with the name QuickTime Event, which allowed him to make more cinematic gameplay moments that wouldn't be possible through traditional gameplay. Of course, Shimyu did more than popularize QuickTime Events, but there is no denying the huge increase of games that use QuickTime Events after the release of Shimyu. Big blockbuster games like God of War, Resident Evil 4, Gears of War, Call of Duty, and even Mass Effect. Even though AM2 may not have been the first to use QuickTime Events, they were the first to name it and show other developers how QuickTime Events could improve their game's storytelling by giving it a more interactive feel. Now every other game uses this method. It's a testament to the talent and attention to detail that Yu Suzuki and his AM2 team had during this era of gaming. So now it's my turn to ask you, what do you think is the biggest change AM2 contributed to video games? Let us know in the comments. If you want to check out some of our written Sega content, head over to segabits.com. It's open 24 hours a day. Well, I mean unless the server's down, right? Yeah. That doesn't count, right guys? That's it for this week's Weekly 5. If you like what you saw and want to see more, don't forget to hit the like button, share, and like always, subscribe.